Hey everyone, you're listening to Pistons and Prosecco with Bryce Bjornson, owner of Jack's 47. The goal of this podcast is to unearth amazing local wedding vendors and help both vendors and couples alike. Today we have Elena with Luxe Wedding Designs, who specializes in the actual design of the wedding. So that's both the planning and the coordination. Elena, we want to start out with the most important question. What's your favorite drink?
Are we talking about alcohol or
If
regular?
you imbibe, yeah.
I will say my go-to is vodka tonic with lime.
Simple. Simple
Hmm.
yet does the job.
Yep, it does the job. It's always good. That's what it is. It's always a good drink.
Well, I think I might have to make a keg of that at some point
Okay,
because a lot of people ask for that, you know?
because it's a good drink.
I don't know.
Classic.
You know me.
It.
I make watermelon mojitos and, fresh
Yeah.
mules, and I get all
Well,
fancy
when
with
you
it.
make it, you have to invite me.
I
I don't have.
will. I'll have it on tap for our opening party, which, our big open house, whenever that happens.
Awesome.
Um,
You can write in honor of Elena.
in honor of Elena. Will do. Will do. So Elena, tell us a little more about, what was the spark that, created this business? How long have you been doing it? And, we can start from there.
Um, hmm. I think for me, the spark in starting the business was the desire to change my life and work for myself versus working for people. And, um, I wanted a different life. So I was pretty determined to create that different life, whatever that looked like. And doing what I do now, it's just what was in my hand and what I knew. So it wasn't like a big moment or anything. It was like, what can I do? What's in my hand to do at this moment that I could make profit from? What do I know? In the wedding industry, I knew. And so I went for it.
So were you working for another planner or designer before that, or how did
Um,
you get started in the wedding industry?
I got started in the wedding industry accidentally. It was definitely never like something I wanted to do my whole life. Not at all. I got thrown into a wedding that was in crisis, gosh, probably like 16 years ago now. And basically, their person that was going to do things couldn't come. And then they had rented all this decor. And when they went to go pick it up, they messed up the order. And so it was just in a mess. And so before I knew it, I found myself picking out their decor, creating everything, sending people down the aisle, something I had never done. And so, and then since that point, I've kind of always had a hand in planning like people's weddings. And I actually moved more into corporate nonprofit, and I ran a nonprofit for a while, and I did a lot of the events for it. It was just like my thing, like
Mm-hmm.
making it happen, fleshing it out, and seeing something come to life. And so I did do weddings for people that I knew, and I was getting requests, and I would have people tell me all the time, like, why don't you do this for a living? And it just wasn't the right time. I was a young mom, brand new baby, had personal things, and it never seemed like the right moment to go in and do it. And then I did work for a wedding um, place at the time. And though I had done planning before that, they asked me if I would do it for them as well. And so I did. And then I finally realized, like, what was interesting for me to realize in some moments was like, wow, I actually can do this better than this person who has done this for a long, long time. Like and I was noticing everything I would never do. And it just kind of made me realize, like, well, what's the worst that can happen? And I literally, honest to goodness, made a decision in 2 weeks. I was mulling over the thought, and I hardly told anybody. I don't think I even told my family. I literally created my own website, started a Facebook page, and went live. And that's how people found out that I decided to do it. And I became a wedding planner. That's how I started. It was just planning weddings. And then all the other pieces of what I do now, like what I was good at was design and planning. And then I added the floral part of it and the decor, with time. So that's how I got into it.
Well, I noticed that there are folks that focus more on the design and planning, and then the folks that are more of the coordinators.
Hmm.
So, and some people say you can't do one without the other, and others say that they just want to do that piece.
Hmm.
So it sounds like you fit in more to the design and planning. Do you still coordinate? Do you offer that as part of the package for a couple? How does that work?
Well, coordinating and planning is very similar. I kind of put those in the same umbrella. The difference is planning the entire wedding versus planning just the day. So it's really just variations in planning is how I would put it. So yeah, I definitely am part of the day. Now I of course have a team as well. So I usually will do more of the decor design floral part and have one of my girls kind of run the day. Or sometimes I'll run the day depending on what the decor kind of floral looks like. And then some of my clients are very, particular of like, we want you to be there on that day. And so I make sure I show up and I'm there to send everybody down the aisle and make sure the flow is good. So, so yeah, I definitely do a lot of planning and decor. Me personally, have always, kind of looked at what I do. I look at it from the lens of design, which, is what I think differentiates me. Because there's a planner piece where you just kind of get everything done. But I kind of tend to look at everything just like when I'm creating a wedding and how pieces are going to fit. And I start with like my starting point and kind of branch out. I do the same with the planning of the day. Like I really am all about having smooth transitions. I plan for extra time. I look at what is the feel and the flow and the vibe of the day, because that to me matters more than being exactly punctual, because it doesn't always work out. Like my weddings don't run late, they're always on time, but it's more of like what flows best into the next thing. And I give leeway room, and it's more of creating an atmosphere of a
Mhm.
really calm, smooth transition versus a marching kind of type of coordination.
Yeah.
And everybody kind of has their own style as to how they execute. But yeah.
Well, you bring up a good point that, yeah, not everything happens exactly when it should, but understanding the flow of an event is really important. So I did a wedding last fall where we had rain, but the bride did not want to do the rain plan. She was like, I want it to clear before, I want to get married at that spot. I don't want to move everything inside. And we had to just wait. We were sitting with the truck and we had umbrellas up and we were serving whoever, was brave enough to come out. And it wasn't horrible rain. It was just, enough that people didn't want to sit down for the ceremony. Right.
Mhm.
But then we had cocktail hour after that. And that was at one location. Then we had to move again to the reception up the hill. So I really think there is a skill set associated with making sure that all moves smoothly.
Yeah. And I
And,
think and with that, it's like I've definitely had weddings like that for sure.
Mhm.
At the end of the day, for me, it's like, you're the bride. What do you want? I'm on your team more than on anyone else's team. So it's like my mind tends to think of what are all the different ways that I can make this happen. That's just
Yeah.
where kind of, and it's, I think where it comes, it's like that fine line of like having this strong but kind of orderly feel, but at the same time just making everything feel like it's supposed to be like this. Like no, like I'm like super calm when I run the show. Like I'm really particular about the atmosphere that I bring, especially as the planner, because you set the tone for the entire day. So if you're intense, really all the other vendors, they kind of feel out your vibe and they fall into sync with that. So if you're like, you bring that atmosphere with you. And so I understand that. And so usually like at my weddings, they're super chill. There could be a million crazy things going on that we didn't plan, but you would never know. And that's something that is really important to me, is like making it look like, oh yeah, this is what we planned. Like I've had so many moments where I'm like in my mind, like, oh crap, like, but if you're talking to me, like, oh, sure. And like my mind is like, okay, how am I going to fix this right now? But you would never know. And like, I've had so many clients or like their parents who kind of have a better, sense of what's going on. They're like, why, you're so calm. Like they're like worried about the fact that I'm calm. And I'm just like,
oh, interesting. Yeah.
They're like, why aren't you panicked? There's this and this going on. I'm like, yep, I know. I've already fixed that. And I've got this going, blah, 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 blah. And this is like, I tend to get, the more intense the situation, the more calm I become. So like, and I do that with my parenting. Like when I'm really mad at my kids, I get really calm and I talk to them like this. I said, you need to go to your room. One. And they're like, Mom is pissed. Like that's how they understand it. They're like, oh, it's getting real now.
I love that. Well, it's funny because you would think that you need someone really intense, right, to coordinate a wedding, but that rubs off on everyone else. It's not a corporate atmosphere, right? It's a wedding. It's a celebration. So, but it has all these moving parts, right? You have a dozen vendors that you're having to deal with, but it's also a celebration of two people coming together to spend the rest of their lives together. So I do think it requires a very unique personality, someone who can execute, but also maintain the atmosphere and the environment.
This is quarantine, okay? This is mom life quarantine.
No worries. This is real. This is reality.
Yeah, this is definitely real. Yeah, it does require a certain personality. And I think if you're somebody that doesn't handle stress, this is not for you. You have to, it's an art. It's a dance that you have to figure out how to dance. And it's mainly just, what do you want to be known for? Like, who are you as a planner and what kind of atmosphere do you want? Because it's not for everybody.
Yeah.
But
yeah. Well, and I think different planners, match up with different people.
Yeah.
And that brings me to my question is, do you have an ideal client? And if so, what do they look like? Who are they?
I don't know if I have an ideal client because I'm kind of a chameleon personality type where I tend to be what I feel like the client needs. So from like a planning standpoint, I mean, obviously the people who trust me to do it all, I definitely want to be trusted. Yeah. If you don't trust me to execute, we're not a good match. But honestly, I become what I need to become for that client. And they're very aware of that. And like, I'm very aware to people's like emotional kind of, I'm a feeler. So I feel kind of where it needs to be. So sometimes with certain clients, I become a little stronger and help them really make decisions. Yeah. With other clients that really want to be the one to make certain decisions, I'll take a backseat a little bit. And then the ones that are high stress, I'm calming them down a bit more. The ones that don't care, I'm kind of putting them in positions where I need them to care a little bit and tell me what they would like and give them ideas and options. So you kind of, and I think, honestly, I think you kind of have to morph a little bit because everybody's wired differently. Like even in communicating, like some brides, the more emails you send them, the more anxious they become. So I restrict my communication and do bulk. Okay, this and this and this has been done in a bulk message. And then I kind of, connect with them periodically as we plan the process. Some, they just want to know every little thing that's happening because otherwise they feel anxious. So I think if you're that involved, I think the planner is the most involved with the client, period. That we're not just in, unless you're there for the day, but if you're planning the entire thing, you're not just one piece of the puzzle, you're putting everything together. So it's really important that you build a certain, relationship that's maybe a bit more personal with your client. So you kind of have to cater a bit more to how they do things.
I totally agree. There's a wedding planner that I took a course with just to learn more about the wedding industry. And she identified I believe 4 or 5 different kind of main personas of the couple. You know, that there's the one that knows exactly what they want and they don't want their mind to be changed, and there's the other one that can't decide on anything and needs guidance. And so I think you're right. There is a need to be dynamic and like a chameleon when dealing with folks, because if you try and impose your personality into the situation, it's just going to cause stress and not be
Yeah.
a good fit and push them away. So
Honestly, like, it's not about you, period. Like, it's about that client. So if you think that it's about your style, your opinions, you can have them and you should, that's what they pay you for. But
Mhm.
it's really about like making them feel good and happy and confident in what you're doing. So you kind of have to put your own whatever on the back burner. I will say though, my ideal client for like the design and decor type and floral, the
Mhm.
crazier the better. I love when clients come to me with like these wacky ideas of, like, I've had people say, I want a winter wonderland wedding, or one was like, she wanted a spin off of like the Greatest British Baking Show. Like, the crazier the theme, the more colors, like that's my jam, because for me, it's a challenge to be cause I have had clients who present like things to me that I'm like, no, like I will not do this for you. But it's like for me a challenge that I have to find a way to
Yes.
execute this craziness and still make it look elegant at the end of the day. Like, if people only knew the weddings I produce and what the bride comes to me with to work with, and what I have to translate into something that doesn't look like a hot mess. So like,
Mm.
to me, that's, I would say, my ideal client. Like, give me some crazy theme. Tell me you want mermaids and butterflies. I don't care. Like, I just want to, like, that stuff for me is like, okay, my brain starts getting, working, and I like that sort of thing.
Do they normally sit down with you and just on a computer and show you their Pinterest board, or how does that process work of working with a client when you're starting out?
Yeah, so it usually starts with, let me see your Pinterest board. That's a huge one. Pinterest is a kind of like a love hate catch 22. Like, there's good in it, but sometimes it can make it more complicated. But I will say, probably the thing that I am best at is translating what they want, because I spend a whole lot of time in that process. Because I'm a designer, I'm not like, so the difference between like a traditional florist and a traditional planner, and where I kind of feel like I'm in the middle and I meet a
Hmm.
different thing, is typically the planner is really focused on making sure the day is good and has a hand in parts of it, but doesn't fully immerse themselves in the full design because they're not a designer.
Hmm.
The florist usually comes up and she's like, okay, let me see, what do you like, and what do you like, and how many do you want of that item? So those are the two approaches. Whereas me as a designer, I'm like, I want to see it all. And so when I
Mm.
see it all, then I see your budget, and then I see your style. I start pulling the pieces together, and then I usually will create like a collage, and we'll go into detail of like how we're going to flesh this out and what is realistic within their budget. Usually it's like, I want all this, but for $200, or it's not that crazy, but you know what I
Yeah.
mean? The designer part of me is like, I know flowers, I make them. So I know exactly how to create this look, but still keep it within budget. And there's so many ways of creating something, but it's just about placement. It's about where you're putting it, what your main floor plan and design is going to look like. And so I
Hmm.
operate in that way. And it's the same, like, because I often will come in as a planner, like when you're coming in as one or the other, your goal is like, okay, I need a profit from this, and this is what is going to be prettiest. But as a planner, I see the full picture. So I'm like, this is important to you, but not as important as this. So let's get this
Wow.
done, but in a way that because I know what matters to you at the end of the day. So it's a little bit of a different approach because it's more of a fuller picture.
Yes.
So yeah, so with the design and like the floral piece of it, I'm really, really detailed with it, because for me, like, my goal is when a bride steps in, she's like, oh my gosh, this is exactly what I want. And if you ever go, look at any of my like reviews or the things people say, that's the biggest thing that they'll talk about. Like, she took all my crazy ideas and made it happen, because a lot of brides have obviously multiple styles that they like. They're like, I want this, I want this, I want this. And so I do a lot of eclectic work. So I mix, and I'm like, yeah, we can do that. We can do that. But this is the way we can do it, where it makes sense and it's stylistically and aesthetically pretty. So I do a lot of, that's probably the thing I spend the most time on, because I'll like, and then I'll put it all in like a visual for them so they can see exactly. And then I write everything out of exactly what we're doing. So it's very clear. It's very like, they know exactly what to expect. And, I have to make sure as a designer is that I'm hitting it, like hitting the nail on the head and getting it exactly to what they want.
Well, we did a styled shoot over a year ago together, and those were some of the best. I mean, it's also the photographer, of course, but those are some of the best styled shoot images that I have in my portfolio to show couples about the truck. And we have a wedding booked for next May.
Mm-hmm. That one's going to be fun.
So I'm really excited to work with you then and to see what happens. To see that design come to light, because I love the idea of someone having a dream and a vision and giving that to you and you executing on that. I think that's awesome. And I'm excited to see that. You mentioned the budget. I really love to talk numbers, but I haven't done so yet on any of my interviews.
Yes, let's bring that. It's my favorite.
The average North Carolina wedding, I thought, was around 23,000. Is that?
Yeah, that's about right. I mean, it depends. Right? If you're averaging out weddings, probably yes. But like, obviously, if they have enough money to hire out all these vendors, that budget's going to look different. Usually, I think the average kind of stems from the people who hire out planners, because people who are really low in budget are not going to hire a planner. You know what I mean? So it's kind of like based on, but yeah, that sounds about right.
So let me try and
just say
what I'm trying to say.
Don't have to worry about polite anything else.
I mean, I guess what I'm trying to figure out, is that reasonable for 100-person wedding with everything taken care of? Or is that more of is that number being affected by weddings that are happening at the 10K level with a lot of DIY? So is a good median maybe like 30 or 40 for everything being taken care of for the average, I don't know, 125 person wedding?
Yes and no. I will say the 23, you can get all your vendors, but you have to compromise. So you can't have the works with everybody.
Yeah.
So like, I always tell my brides, when you think about your wedding, what's the most important thing to you? And that's where you kind of have to decide what is most important. The things that are most important, put your money there. And then you kind of work your way down. And so if you want like the works, then I would say a more reasonable is 35, somewhere around there, where you can maybe compromise some, but not quite as much, because there's no way you can have a full planner, the floral and decor that you want, having like cool tricks with your bartending, having the venue that you want, making sure you have all the staffing that you need. Like, that's just not, you have to compromise somewhere. And so that's where that whole piece of like, what's most important to you. And that's where you can still have the wedding you want, because really what happens at the end of the day, when everything's said and done, and you look back, the things that are most important to you are the things that are going to be highlighted in your mind. So if it was getting a specific dress or a specific band or whatever, and if you compromise on it and you weren't exactly thrilled, you're going to have regret towards that. You know what I mean? So you're like, I wish I had just spent that extra $1,000 or $2,000 on what I actually wanted, because you're going to just remember that because it mattered to you. Somebody else is going to think it's great, but it really just depends on what's important to you. So yeah, I would say 23 is still a good budget to have pretty much the basics of everything even hired out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. I like your point of focusing on the things that matter, right? Because people who could care less about the bar, they don't usually hire me because I'm, maybe twice or 3 times as much as just a bartender, depending on how, what we're doing, of course.
Mhm.
And then I've had some couples that they spent 3 times as much on their venue for the bar service. You know, they had a very modest venue, but they really liked the truck and they really
Mhm.
wanted, you know, local craft beer, and that was their priority. Whereas I've had other ones where they spent, you know, 3 or 4 times as much on the venue as they did the bar service. So I'm starting to realize that, yes, it's where your priorities are. And that's something, if you do have a limited budget, which probably 80 or 90% people do have some limit
Yeah.
to the budget, need to sit down and figure out what their top 3 priorities are, because you're right, that's what they'll remember. And that's a good point. I didn't think about it like that until now. So
Yeah.
you know, and it's, a lot of people say, you know, we want reasonable priced vendors or budget vendors, and I don't think people realize that you know, the people who are in the wedding industry are bringing everything to you. Like, it's not like you're going to a bar and getting a beer, or a restaurant and getting a burrito. It's like they're bringing everything to you. That's why weddings cost this much, because you're putting on an event, you know, with professional vendors in each category. So when I first entered the industry, I was like, how does someone spend 20 grand on a wedding? And now I look at it and I'm like, oh, how does someone not yeah, I'm like, how do you not spend 40 grand on a wedding? So
Yeah.
I'm learning as I go. And I just, you know, I just love, that's part of what this podcast is about, is kind of unearthing things that people don't think about and bringing to light some new ideas, like your priority suggestion. I love that. So if, you know, what's that process look like? We talked a little bit about, you know, looking at the vision board on the Pinterest page, kind of getting a sense of what their priorities are. Do you then go and visit the venue with them, you know, one
Mhm.
time or 3 times? How, you know, how does that whole process work?
Usually once, unless we feel like we need to go back out and we've talked about something else. But usually once, because so I have like certain sessions. Like there is usually like your initial kind of planning, you know, what vendors have we booked, what do we need to book type of session. And then there is like, what is the day going to look like type of session. And then the design decor piece of it. And usually I call that my dream session, because like I'm a visionary, and so for me, what I like to do with my clients is like, okay, let's dream. I don't want you to cap anything, because I literally can create anything, but I know we've got a budget. So let me just hear it all, and let's throw everything out there, and then we take it and we reel it in, and we actually focus on what is doable and what's, and even with floral, like because I'm a designer, I look at what is the high impact stuff. We need stuff that's going to be high impact. That is going to be, you're getting the most for your budget. So this is worth to do. These things are not. Like, and I'm so upfront and blunt. Like my goal with everything, whether you book me or not, is I want to give you value. Period. So I'm not the type of person that, as we're talking about your wedding, until you book me, I'm not going to tell you. I'm just going to tell you tricks as we're talking, because I think when your priority is to help somebody, you know, the money comes, but your priority has to be to help that person. So at the end of the day, for me, whether you book or not, and it turns into a conversation of whatever it turns into, like I'm there to place value and give you value. So that's kind of how I break up my sessions. Sometimes we do multiple. I think in general, my approach is I don't like to overwhelm my brides, because you can get overwhelmed quickly. So I break it down, and like I don't have a solid, like we have to do this by this point for the most part. There are certain things, yes, you do. But I'm more like, okay, we have to book these 3 vendors in the next, you know, month, for example, depending on where they are in the timeline of things. And so I just kind of categorize it by what are the most important vendors that we need to make sure, and then kind of work my way down. So it's just this process of like what fits for you, what's good for your budget, making sure we get the most important things, and just taking it in measures. And so this allows like my clients not to panic, not to stress out. And then the dream session is probably the most fun for my clients, because it's playtime. It's like, okay, this is, because usually for most people, it's like when they think of their wedding, they imagine it in a certain way and it being beautiful. Like that's what they imagine. They don't technically imagine the food or, you know, something else. They imagine the ambiance and how it's going to look. So that's probably the most fun session, to be like, oh, we can do this. And then I'm like, because I have my own inventory, like I can be like, we can do this, we can do this. You know, I can give them multiple options of based on, you know, their look, their style. And I can't count, like, honestly, how many times a bride will come to me and be like, well, my style is this and this and this, and I like this and this. And so they'll tell me, but then when I start looking at their Pinterest board, I'm like, no, this is actually not your style, because this is what I'm seeing. And I will like literally put language to something they didn't know they had. They're like, oh my gosh, you're right. I remember one bride, it was so funny. She was like, my style is like rustic, and I really like kind of like a, you know, a little elegant, but more rustic. And I'm like, okay, let me, you know, see your Pinterest board. And so everything on her board was like glamorous. And she's getting married in a barn, right? And then I'm like, okay, you know, the only thing rustic was like a crate. That was it, and a sign. But there was nothing rustic about it. And then she continues to show me her dress. It is sparkly. And I'm like, girl, you are not rustic. Like, what I see is like, and so I threw a few adjectives to basically, because there was a few different looks with what she was showing me. So I kind of pulled it all together, and she's like, oh, you're so right. You know, like it was like an aha moment, because I'm like, see, when you're showing me this, this is what I see. When I see this photo, this is what I see. So I'm like interpreting kind of, and then they're like discovering all this stuff about them. And so many times that as the conversation goes on, and like I'll show them things I've done or what we can do, they end like I would say half of the time I send them back to Pinterest to rediscover what they actually want. And so it's been really interesting to kind of see that whole process evolve.
That's funny. I I don't get that in depth with my clients, right? So I love hearing these stories. Yeah. So if they want, yeah, that's funny. So given your experience, do you have any crazy wedding stories that you want to share with our guests?
I have so many. I'll pick my craziest ones. Okay. This is really early on in my career. So I remember one of my brides had a mentally ill father. And, you know, he had a lot of different belief systems. And anyway, so literally I have the entire wedding party lined up, getting ready to send them down the aisle. And it was in a church setting. So they're like, the doors are closed, thank God. And so I've got them all ready to go. And then before I know it, this man comes marching straight to his daughter, because he was going to obviously walk her down, with a pair of scissors in his hand. And he decided that he didn't like her train, and he was going to cut off her train. And like literally I was just like, oh my gosh. So I had to like kind of escort him, like, let me take those away. And I had somebody from the family kind of deal with the father, and the bride was like in hysterics. I literally had to take her into another room, all the wedding party, and literally we had like a little bit of a therapy session. Thank goodness for my education in that. I use it more than I care to admit. So I had to like, calm her down and just kind of regroup things. And then, and I'm like, it's okay that we're starting late. Like, it's not a big deal. People will be fine. This is not your day. And kind of went in my like therapy mode, if you will. Mm-hmm. And so yeah, and then I had to send her down the aisle. That one was pretty crazy.
Wow.
Wow. I definitely had one. This is a couple years back, but where a bride, so we kind of planned everything. And so when I am doing floral and all of that, like I like write it all out. They get invoices, numbers, everything is based on a plan. And so that's what I know to create. And so I guess the night before, she told me the day of, I changed the order of the tables or something. And I said, okay, no worries. So here, and it was like one of those, like they had a cocktail hour. So during cocktail hour, I'm kind of looking at everything. And then I realized, like, basically they had recreated the tables and the seating chart, but they added 2 tables, and they didn't tell me about it. And this tent was so small, like you couldn't fit them in. And I was like, oh my gosh. So we were like coming up with the tables, trying to find this is during the cocktail hour, because that's when we were realizing we're like I was looking at her chart and I was like, this is really confusing. Like, why is there these additional tables? Like, and so I kind of had to come to her. I'm like, hey, I'm just wondering, like, and she's like, oh, I added things. I sent it to you the day before or the night before. And I was like, but she didn't mention that she added additional tables. She just said she changed the list. So I was just thinking she had changed where everyone was sitting. Anyway, so literally I had to figure out and readjust her decor to put some kind of something on these, tables. Like, and so literally we whipped it out in like 30 minutes. It was insane. And like after that wedding, I was like, oh my God, what am I doing?
Never again.
So, I mean, there's definitely been.
Is that your biggest challenge? Is your clients trying to change things last minute, or what would you say is?
No, changing last minute is fine.
Okay.
That one was a challenge just because it was during cocktail hour. We had to come up with everything. Like if I had known ahead of time to be added, I could have really, it would have eliminated that last minute kind of, what she meant was she added more tables, not she changed the order. So, but I think it's just, it depends. Like the challenges would be depending on the personality sometimes. And then sometimes it can be on, family dynamics can be tricky sometimes. Not a whole lot, but they're definitely there. I think probably the most challenging wedding I've had a few years back was with just a couple, and literally I would say it was more the groom, but he literally asked me the same questions 4 times minimum. And apparently this is how he was with all the vendors. And so it was just really intense, and then he was just a very intense character where it was like, I mean, I've bent over backwards for this wedding, but everything was like questioned, and it was like he had decided things, but they never communicated to me. And then they were asking me like, where is this? And I'm like, I have no communication of this. You guys decided to add this without letting me know. Like, how am I supposed to know to plan for it? So it was just a really intense dynamic. And I would say probably the funniest thing was that he had to approve of the floral and design. And I've never had a man kind of step into that role. So he went into like the reception to make sure it was good. And he looked around and he was like, yeah, it looks really good. Okay. And he walked out. And I just stood there like I wasn't sure like what to do with it, because it's usually the women that are just more involved and more that care about all that. So it was quite interesting. It was definitely like a learning experience. That was really early in my career, but you have your your moments that you're just like, okay.
Definitely. Yeah. Well, on the flip side, what would you say you enjoy most about your work in the business?
I think what I enjoy most is probably 2 things. I think I enjoy when a bride thinks that only this is possible. And when in our dream session, I pull out all of this stuff. And like, I have had a bride in moments where like, I remember this was actually recently, but she was like all greenery. And the more we started talking, and then she showed me one picture that she really liked. And I was like, that is really boho. And so I started pulling out all these different things, and she was like, oh, I love it, And so like we completely flipped her style, like in 10 minutes. And I had of course a whole plan for her ready to go. But like, I think my favorite part is like opening up somebody's eyes to what is possible and being like, oh, I can do this for you. And I want to do this for you. And I think just, I get a lot of satisfaction from like going above the expectation level. So it's like my competition is myself, further down the road. So like, so I'm always like, how do I, so I like to pull out certain things out of people, and then they realize like, oh my gosh, I didn't know that was me, or I didn't know this was. So I like that piece of it. And I think I like to be, like, I think if I help somebody and I feel like I've made it easier for them, that gives me a lot of satisfaction in what I do. And then obviously because I'm flipping the space, I see the immediate results of that. And I've turned some ugly spaces into some gorgeous, you know, events. And so like seeing the work is intense, but seeing like the before and then the after, you know, is I really enjoy that. So I'd say probably those, the creative kind of process is probably my favorite piece of it.
Great.
People.
Yeah, that's great to hear. That reminds me of when I was going to therapy, and the therapist almost became like a business coach for me because at that time, like I had dealt with some stuff, and I was like, all right, I don't really need that right now, like the personal, but I have a lot to deal with my business. And she was able to kind of coax out of me some things. And it's amazing what we can dream when someone helps facilitate that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Compared to like thinking we're all, you know, I mean, yes, we should be empowered with ourselves, but at the same time, having others help us move forward to our vision, whether it's a wedding or not, I just think is powerful. So I'm glad you're able to do that for your clients.
Yeah, I think it's asking the right questions and seeing maybe what people can't see. That's what makes a good therapist is like, you know, they see through a different lens.
Exactly. Well, do you have anything in the works for the future? Anything new that you want to share with?
A lot. So, so like I am definitely an entrepreneur at heart. Again, the reason I changed the name, you know, obviously went from Elena Events to Luxe is because I'm all about expanding, you know, like I don't, you know, I get a lot of satisfaction from helping people. So like getting into the wedding industry and doing what I'm doing now, like I wouldn't say that it was my dream per se. My dream is so much deeper than that. It's like just really, I've always been like a philanthropist type of person where I get so much out of helping people that it's like addictive. And so for me, it's like, how do I take what I do and broaden it for people? So I think future wise, like, honestly, I want to empower more women who, especially like I already have several women working for me, but I have women who are a little older or moms or people who maybe can't get a standard 9 to 5 and like giving them freedom and flexibility to be creative and then them making good money. And so like, my goal is to grow a company and partner with multiple planners and kind of see what it could become, but not just so it becomes like a place where I'm kind of profiting, but I want to give people a stake in the company. Do you know what I mean? Like for me, I gain a lot from seeing somebody like succeed. Like that is like my drive. So definitely that is the big piece of it because like, I mean, I want to do something else. Like I get bored. So I'm just like literally I started as a planner. By the end of the year of a planner, I added decor and design. And then the next year I started doing floral, which I've never done in my life. I'm completely self-taught florist, which 3 years prior to that, I told somebody I would never do flowers ever because I would help a florist. And I was like, I will never do floral. But now that's what I'm known for. So like, I'm always in that position of what's next. Like that's kind of my philosophy and the way that I think. And honestly, this something I'd throw out there just to vendors now, like we have to be thinking of what's coming because people are going to be on a budget. We have to, you know, kind of figure out how are we going to meet the needs when the economy does get going. Are there things we can do now, maybe for elopements or things that we can offer people, you know, because they think if you're not thinking, like, this is the crazy part is like, I was already thinking of a recession before this ever happened. So in my business, I was planning for the time when the economy was going to tank because it always does. You follow cycles and all of that. And so I had released my design course. I started filming it in December of last year for the time that people would need to do the DIY. I just talked about a new package that I'm starting to offer where I basically am including for $12.95, I'm including floral decor all in one crate per table. So literally you take out everything that belongs on that table. It's ready to go. You can just do it quickly. It's super inexpensive. I priced it in a way that is so affordable, but I had already come up with that back in January, not obviously not anticipating the coronavirus, but my brain and the way I was thinking was like, okay, the next wave is going to be this. What do I have ready for that time? And so it's kind of, as entrepreneurs and as business owners, if we don't think of what's coming, we will be wadded out, period. Like at this point, it's like a survival thing because we're all losing business and we're all losing money, but it's like our mindset has to be, and it goes back to like what I talked about, like in the beginning of my principle has always been, I want to help people. I want to give value. It's not about making the profit. And if you mix those up, you get in real trouble. If it starts becoming about making money, you stop seeing your people and the needs and how to meet them. So if it's always about your client and meeting their need, then the profit comes because it's not about making the profit. Because I see a lot of people that start with meeting the client's need and then it turns into profit. And oftentimes, if they're not careful or if they're not always on the money with what their client needs, their quality of work starts regressing. The way they're dealing with people starts regressing. And eventually over time, that's not sustainable and you lose out and someone else comes alongside and beats you in that market. Yeah. So you always have to make it about your person. So right now, knowing that the economy is shifting, yeah, I love these high-end weddings that I get to do where I can play a whole lot and have flexibility, but it's going to look different now. It's going to look different. So my thought process has to be what is in the works for what's coming, not what, right now there's nothing happening. So it's a perfect time for you to be like, okay, if I were in this person's shoes and I was getting married and I had a very limited budget, what would I buy? What would I pay for? What would be worth it to me? What would make me sell more than the person next to me? And kind of thinking through that lens, because at the end of the day, it's about that client. It's about how do I help that client and beat out competition. And a lot of people will even focus on their competition, which is so stupid because we all bring something different to the table. And it's like, if you're more focused on what, really getting honest with yourself about where you're at, and really, is your product as good as you're thinking it is? Are you really the best that's out there? A lot of people don't want to ask themselves those questions. I always ask myself that stuff. And I think it has saved me a lot of poor choices. And I've made a lot of good decisions as my business progressed because I'm really ridiculously honest about, no, I can do better. I can offer more. You book floral with me, I include decor at no charge. I don't nickel and dime people and it's not because I don't want to make a profit. I do, but my value for the client and providing more value than maybe my counterparts, that supersedes that. So my energy is on what can I do better? What can I, in the times coming, what can I do that is more affordable because that's the way that it's going to be without sacrificing quality? What can I do? I don't care what these people are doing here. What can I do? What is reasonable for me? And anyway, so that's where I'm thinking, things to come. How do I, how do I expand that? How do I look at it differently?
Yeah. No, I agree. I think we all start with wanting to provide value, but as a business owner, it's easy to get caught up in all this other stuff. And then if you're making money, you might start to focus on that. And our egos get involved and it just can get messy. So I agree. If you focus on providing your client or even potential client, right, with value, hopefully the money will follow. But if not, fine. I'm glad to help someone. I have a whole blog up on, local beer recommendations and how to make a signature cocktail and all this stuff, because I genuinely do want to help people have a better bar experience at the wedding, right? If they hire me or not. It just so happens people love the trucks, but going back to that, that, the original goal, which is to help people, to provide and to serve, I think is really important.
Yeah, Yeah, for sure. And I think it's also to be mindful and not grow too fast, because you can always extend. But if you're, because that's, I think what happens with ego is just like, we kind of like, oh, now I can do it all. We have like a moment of like, oh, things are going. And if we're not careful and we don't ask ourselves hard questions about like, where am I really at? Not where I'm seeing myself, but where am I really at? Then we can get into trouble a lot. And I think a lot of businesses right now that are in trouble are looking at the profit versus the actual, what they're actually making. They're looking at like, okay, what has my entire company brought in versus what do I get after the expenses? And so you get yourself in a lot of trouble when you're not honest with yourself and looking at your numbers, and you're trying to, feed that ego part of you and present as something that is not accurate. And so I think the more honest you are with yourself about who you are as a person and who you are as a business person, how do you treat your clients? When you get really honest, you tend to make better choices because you're looking at it with critical eyes instead of being like, oh, they don't like me. Oh, it's their problem. And whatever. It's like, no, why don't they like you? What are you doing that is putting that bad energy out there? Like, why are people having an issue? Usually the problem is you, but people don't want to ask themselves those kinds of questions because doesn't feel good,
Yeah, it's the hard work, right? uh,
Anyway.
Elena, thanks so much for joining me on the podcast. If a couple wants to work with you, what's the best way to reach out? Is it your website? Do you have an Instagram, Facebook?
All of the above. So you can definitely reach out on our website. We've got I have my phone number on there. I have like the contact form, the email address. I try to make myself extremely reachable. And I'm always available for questions or anything like that. So Instagram is a good one. Facebook is a good one. And definitely the now luxeweddingdesigns.com. So yeah, all of the above.
Perfect. Well, I will include all those links in the show notes. And I am so looking forward to our wedding together in May 21. So can't wait to see you. Hopefully I'll see you before and then, but if not, take care of yourself. And thanks again for joining me.
Yeah, you're absolutely welcome. Anytime.